I sense a lot of confusion in the roadmap for future Apple Silicon. It's a question that comes up a lot in live streams and in comment sections, so in today's video, I just thought I would explain the separate tiers that I think Apple Silicon is going to go forward with, and keep in mind this is based a lot on Bloomberg's reports. It's not official from Apple, it's a lot of speculation and prediction on my part, but I hope by the end it'll just make a tad more sense. Let's begin. Very possibly this video could become outdated right after Quadruple U DC, so if you're watching this past June 7th, there might be some more recent Tailosive tech videos that you'd rather watch that could be more up to date. But a lot of the confusion comes from people thinking that there's an M1X chip in the works, which we don't know the official naming, but essentially a version of the M1 chip that's even faster. According to Bloomberg, this chip would have 8 high-performance cores. Keep in mind the M1 chip only has 4, and the M1 chip also has between 7 and 8 graphics cores, and the M1X is rumored to have 16 or configurable up to 32 graphics cores, which means between 2 to 4 times better graphics than the M1, roughly. It's not exactly linear when you add more cores, but M1X is supposed to just have 2 high-efficiency cores, which means that it might be a tad more power-hungry, but that's okay, because it'll be going into products with bigger batteries, like the MacBook Pro, as well as the 16-inch MacBook Pro. This could also be going in the larger size iMac between 30 and 32 inches. But at the same time, a lot of people are thinking, well, why would I get the M1X if there's also this rumored M2 chip that's supposed to be coming out in the fall? Is the M2 chip gonna be way better than the M1X? I don't necessarily think so. I believe that similar to Apple having X series of chips for things like the iPad Pro, getting A10X chip, which was faster than the A11 even, and the A12X and A12Z chip, which were faster than the A13, there's different tiers that fit different demographics. So there's a chance that the M2 chip could launch in the fall somewhere around October or November, and that would be going in the MacBook Air. But the M2 chip is not objectively faster than the M1, because the M2 will still be a tier meant for that high efficiency, not so crazy high performance, and you want to prioritize battery life a little bit. So according to Bloomberg at least, that M2 chip that could launch by the end of this year would still only have 4 high performance cores, and it would have 4 high efficiency cores, but it would actually get a few boosts in graphics, meaning that instead of 8 GPU cores, this one could have around 10, maybe some improved efficiency with those 4 high efficiency cores, and that would result in the MacBook Air having better graphics, better battery life. But in regards to CPU performance, pretty much expect it to stay the same, which I don't think will be an issue to many people because the M1 chip is still plenty fast for the demographic that the M1 MacBook Air is going after. M2 will be that same demographic. It will not outperform the M1X, which is going to have way more graphics cores and way more high performance cores, which are going to be less power efficient, but result in having very fast Apple Silicon, which I'm sure will be very difficult to match in the PC world. And I think similar to how we've had iPhone and iPad Pro CPUs kind of coexisting with each other, we're also going to have that X series of chips with better graphics, more high performance cores, launching at a different time of the year as the more efficient chip. And I think for the vast majority of the Mac lineup, we will pretty much only need those 2 tiers. So right now, Apple seems to be pretty comfortable using the M1 across lots of different things, even iPads. But yeah, we've got the same chip in MacBook Air, in the base MacBook Pro, which I still don't think needs to exist. They've got it in the Mac Mini, and they've also got it in the 24-inch iMac. So when it comes to the M1X, if you can imagine all the great power we've seen from the M1, and now multiply that by 2, or maybe even 4 when it comes to graphics performance, that overhead I think would pretty much cover the larger size iMac. It would cover the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros that we could see next week. There's also talks of the M1X coming into a higher-end Mac Mini that would probably start around $1,100, just like the Intel one they're still selling, but it would of course be substantially faster and more powerful than the other M1 Mac Mini, so I think the overall cost would still make it of tremendous value. But the one Mac that I could see not quite getting the M1X, and perhaps Apple developing some kind of third tier, which we haven't really seen before with this series of Apple Silicon chips. Typically, you know, we've had our iPhone CPUs that also make their way into mid-range and budget iPads, and then the iPad Pros get something a little bit extra. And with Apple Watch chips, it's pretty much always the same, just one new upgrade after each year with more efficiency, slightly better performance. But because the Mac lineup is built, I think, a lot more around performance, whereas iPhones and iPads, that's less of a concern. Of course, the same story with Apple Watches watches and AirPods and that kind of thing, but Macs are meant for getting high performance work done, and there's a lot of audio editing and video editing and 3D rendering software that takes advantage of how fast the chips within the computer can be, and because of that, I could see the Mac Pro not getting refreshed this year, but perhaps at June of 2022, Apple will announce a Mac Pro that has some type of custom Apple silicon at a way higher performance tier than even the M1X. According to Bloomberg, the Mac Pro redesigned with Apple silicon is planning for having somewhere between 16 and 32 high performance cores, okay? So M1 still has 4, which means the Mac Pro would have 4 to 8 times the high performance cores of that, and not to mention somewhere between 64 and 128 graphics cores. So even a substantial improvement in GPU performance over the M1X, which is still going to cover the vast majority of the Mac lineup. And there's some people that are theorizing the Apple Silicon Mac Pro will basically just be using multiple versions of the same M1X chip, just kind of tethered together, like there's 4 of them or more, instead of developing some kind of specialized system on chip just for the Mac Pro. It's probably too early for us to tell, given the Apple Silicon Mac Pro could very possibly be a year away from right now. If it comes out sooner, I'll be very happy and excited to check it out, because I want to see how affordable Apple can make that kind of groundbreaking performance that's supposed to be able to outperform all of the Intel Mac Pros, yes, even the $50,000 version, and how Apple's going to price that and how they're going to introduce it to their lineup. That's very interesting to me, and it makes total sense that something very, very expensive and high-end like the Mac Pro would not just get the same chip as like the 14-inch MacBook Pro or the $1,100 Mac Mini. Like the Mac Pro, because it's so expensive and so high-end, it should have a little bit more power, a little bit more juice that separates it from the rest of the Mac lineup. And would Apple put that kind of Mac Pro power in any other Mac? I really hope so, but there's not a lot of evidence in the rumor or leak community right now that's suggesting that. You know, I would love it if they decided to make an iMac Pro, like bring that back, and that version can start at $5,000 or $6,000, but it has the same silicon as the Apple Silicon Mac Pro, but now it's in an all-in-one design and maybe has some mini LED display of some kind. I don't know what they're planning, but I just hope the explanation that there's going to be 2 tiers of chips that get upgraded perhaps each year, one that's prioritizing battery life and one that prioritizes performance, and it's not just about M2 being always objectively better than M1X. It's very likely that the M1X might not even get refreshed annually, just like the iPad Pro X series of chips. They didn't get refreshed at the same time every year. There's sometimes 15 to 18 months between each of those refreshes, so it might not be until the end of 2022 that we see the M2X chip, because there's so much overhead and so much great performance in the M1X. Apple's just not really going to see the point in updating it right away. We'll know for sure in a few years if Apple wants to get things into a bit more of a rhythm, just like iPhone launches always being around September. Maybe they want to do that with Macs as well and kind of refresh them at the same time each year. That would be a lot easier for us consumers, but Apple probably doesn't want everybody to stop buying, 6 months before they get refreshed, and maybe that's why Apple would prefer us not really knowing what they're going to do. They don't know when the new Macs are going to launch. You should just buy one right now, and that's the business mindset that they're going to push on you. But I'm personally very interested in seeing the Geekbench tests and the export times of the M1X. I hope you guys are excited for next week's event as much as I am, and hopefully we get to see some kind of crazy performance in a Mac Pro-like version of Apple Silicon by the end of this year. If not, it has to happen sometime next year, because Tim Cook said this whole transition was going to take 2 years, and we're already about a year into this. So what do you guys think is going to happen? This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you guys in the next one.